specifically, because this is just an hour long. I know it seems like a long time, but it's flying by. It's 37 after already. But the question was, why do certain neighborhoods appear to get less than others, the ones who perhaps need it the most?
And it's because if we could have, for example, as my legislation does, in these neighborhoods, which are also often of those who are the minorities, my minority business enterprise centers, for example, should be associated with those types of minority-serving institutions. Only 2 of them are across the nation. My legislation says they are to be associated with minority-serving institutions in order to get these neighborhoods moving again. And transportation, you're right. We need a greater investment into public transportation in order to get our people able to places where they can work.
All right, Congressman, thank you. Mr. Toomey.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, I'm sympathetic to that question, and I think it speaks to just the incredible inefficiency of government. I mean, so often resources get so badly misallocated. Earmarks are a great example. We tie up resources with earmarks, then politicians go around and decide which favored constituency is going to get the money, and it might not, very well might not be the neighborhood that needs it the most. In fact, quite typically it won't be. It'll be based on political interest instead. So I think a much better approach is to determine categories, grant projects that are broad categories that have merit, and then allocate that money to states and let states and local officials who are closest to the problems, who best understand where those resources make the decision about the allocation.
Let's go to Facebook question number 2 from Mark Rickard. Do you think the $1 trillion stimulus funding has extended higher unemployment rates longer than if the markets work things out by themselves? Mr. Toomey, I'll start with you on this one.
Well, we would be much better off if we hadn't launched that giant stimulus bill. And I still can't believe that Joe Sestak thinks it should have been even bigger. This is an example of how extreme he is. I don't know of anyone else that thinks it should have been $1 trillion. But this is the mindset of Joe. I mean, he's voting in lockstep with Nancy Pelosi, and his only criticism is that she doesn't go far enough. The fact is, we can't borrow and spend our way to prosperity. You know, if that were going to work, then Greece would have the most successful economy in the world. That's why I advocated a different approach. I said, you know, instead of just growing government and putting politicians in control of all this money, let's have an across-the-board cut in payroll taxes for the workers, all workers, and the matching employer share. We could have cut payroll taxes roughly in half for about 3 years. Every single worker would have had an immediate take-home pay raise. Everybody. Wouldn't have to worry about whether you had a shovel-ready project, of which there were very, very few. And every employer would have found it less expensive to hire the next worker. That would have been a much more constructive way to deal with this, rather than growing government and putting politicians in control of all this money.
Congressman.
Thanks, David. Let's look at the stimulus bill. We know if we hadn't done it, the mainstream economists said another 8 million Americans would have lost their jobs. Unemployment would be over 11% today. 1/3 of the stimulus went to tax cuts for the middle class, not corporations, for the middle class and the lower income. 1/3 went to unemployment. Congressman Toomey voted against unemployment benefits 4 times in Congress. 1/3 was to take care of middle class and lower income and slammed apart in their lives through no fault of their own. And 1/3 was for job creation. But he's right. I did want to do something else. I wanted to work with Republicans, say, Republicans, you like business, we like business. My party needs to understand business is a good word when you put small in front of it especially. And if we had given that tax credit of 15% for every new job that was created, we'd have 5 million jobs, according to the Economic Institute, created today. It's a matter of looking at it pragmatically and moving forward. Was the stimulus, did it help? Yes, it did. Was it something I wanted Congress to do? No. But it was something to where we'd been torpedoed, the ship was sinking. We had to caulk the holes. 700,000 jobs a month were being lost, but we've created 1 million in the last 8 months.
And to the control room, I think I need to get to the last 2 videotape and Facebook questions because the time has just flown here. So I'm going to do that right now, and then I'll ask a couple more, hopefully really quick answers. I know that's hard for you guys,
no
but
problem,
let's. All right, from Facebook, I love this one as well. From Cheryl Myers Cotter, what is your most obvious fault, and what is your biggest strength? Congressman Sestak, what's your most obvious fault?
I try to do too much. When I went to Congress, for example, I went to the Armed Services Committee. Steny Hoyer, the majority leader, says, you're going to the Intelligence Committee because I headed the Navy's anti-terrorism unit, was on the ground in Afghanistan for a short mission. I asked to get out of that and be on the Education Committee because education is the key to the future competing with China. But then I asked for a waiver, David, to get out of, to be on a third committee. We're only allowed to be on 2 for small businesses, create 80% of all jobs. My greatest asset, well, it's my wife.
Well done.
We'll go to dinner tonight, and I love her, but really, I think it's what I learned in the U.S. military. I learned it isn't about me. I learned that you're not just responsible for what you're supposed to do, you're willing to be held accountable for what you're willing to do. Those were some tough votes I took down there. But I did it because it mattered to Pennsylvanians that were losing their job. When a father walks up those stairs, and he has to tell a young boy, his son, that he's not going to go to the college that he'd been saving for because he lost his job, and many other fathers and mothers, those 8 million jobs we lost weren't just jobs. They were fathers and mothers, and we prevented another 8 million from having lost their jobs. Right. So I'm willing to be held accountable for doing things for Pennsylvania.
All right, so it's you try to do too much in your wife. Sir, your biggest fault, well, on the plus side of your wife, and your biggest strength.
Well, maybe my biggest fault is I think sometimes I try to keep a lot of balls up in the air and can get distracted, and it's important to impose the discipline of keeping focused on what's really important.
It's the same answer to both questions, but did you know that?
I've met his wife.
You try to do too much.
Yeah. There's no question that my wife is my biggest asset. There's no question about that. But on a personal level, I think one of my strengths, and it comes out of my small business experience, one of the things I discovered, working as hard as I could every day with my brothers to try to grow this business, to make the right decisions, if we did our very best and worked as hard as we could hope to be competitive with the other good players in our competitive area. That gave me a sense of humility. If I have to work that hard to be good at my business, who am I to tell everyone else how to run theirs? I'm willing to listen, to understand what's important so that I can develop policies that will be helpful.
All right, let's go to our last videotape question. Let's listen to that right now.
Okay, hi, my name is Denise Attar, Pittsburgh, PA. I grew up in the Middle East where there's no separation between church and state. Do you think that religion should play or be involved in our government?
Who was the last
Did gentlemen hear that? Religion should play a role or be involved in government. She said she grew up in the Middle East where there was no separation. Right. The role of religion in government, sir.
Well, I mean, one of the really great strengths of the United States, of course, is our great Constitution, and the very First Amendment has the Establishment Clause, which says that Congress will pass no law respecting the establishment of religion nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That's a vital part of our constitutional system, our history, and our tradition. But it doesn't mean that we have to deny the fact that most Americans are people of faith, that our Judeo-Christian heritage is an important part of who we are, and that it does inform the judgment of most Americans. It also forms ultimately the basis of many of our laws. And sometimes I think there's a tendency to think that we have to sort of deny faith and deny religion entirely. I don't think that's what the Establishment Clause means. So, for instance, I'm a big believer that we should offer every child the opportunity to attend the school that their parent chooses for them. I think that would be enormously helpful for the quality of education, and there are so many kids stuck in failing schools. Now, I happen to believe that the parents ought to be able to choose schools, whether they're public or private, religious or non-religious. I don't think that's a violation of the fact that we should never establish a state church. I think it would be a great opportunity for the kids to have a better education, and I'd like our tax dollars to follow the child to the school of their parents' choice.
Okay, Congressman.
Thanks, David.